continuing on in our Oscars project, we want to build Form 1. And I'm going to start with having a picture box over on the left-hand side. It's going to show that Oscar statue picture. I'm going to look at what the size of that Oscar statue picture was. And I can come to the image and go to Properties. And it's 340 by 800 pixels. Looking at my project, it is about 1200 by 640. And maybe I want this image made to be about 550 pixels high. So I want to figure out the proportion of that. You can use Excel to figure out the proportions. So I'm going to use X and Y. My width was 340, the height was 800 of the image. And let's say we want to make this 550. So this is going to be the Y. I want to know what the X should be to keep this proportional. So in Excel, I can simply in this cell D3 say equals cell C3 divided by B3, and it's about 68%. So then the width would be equal to the image width, 340 pixels, times this percentage, and about 234 pixels. So I'm going to come back to my project. I'm going to take a picture box, and we'll draw a picture box over on the left-hand side. I'm going to set the size to be 234, 550. And then I'm going to bring in the image. And I'm going to set the size mode to stretch image. And that looks pretty good. Now, because the image had a transparent background, it doesn't matter what our background color is. It's going to meld into that background very well. Okay, now I'm going to add in a label at the top. This will be our title. We're going to set the text to Oscar History. And I'm going to make it much larger in terms of the font. We'll make this bold, and about 48. That looks pretty good. I'm going to take another label just below that, and the text of this label is simply going to be year, or years. Make it plural. And then I'm going to create a list box. And in this list box, I want to list all of the years that are associated with our database. I'm going to go back to that little label for years. I'm going to change the font on that to be a little bit larger and bold. And let's name our list box LST years. At this point, I want to make sure that we can bring in our database and it's all functioning correctly, and then have it populate the years from that database. I'm going to double click on the list box because we'll eventually add a event handler to the list box for the selected index changed. I'm going to double click on it just to get to our code behind. Okay, so within Form 1, we're going to create a couple class level variables. We'll put a comment in here of class level. And I want a list of type nominee. That was our data model that we created. And I'm going to call it noms. And it equal new list of type nominee. And I want to call the constructor for the list. So I need a set of parentheses and a semicolon. So our data is going to be all read into this particular list. As we work with our project, we want to have a couple of variables that we'll keep track of. One of those is a string variable called winner, and the other one is an integer called selected year. I'm just going to set winner equal to nothing. And int selected year. Okay. In our form 1 constructor, we initialize the components, and I'm going to add a method called load nominee list. And then we're going to create that method. It's not going to take any parameters. It's going to have a void return. Our first statement is going to be noms equals, and we're going to call SQLite data access. That was our helper class. And we're going to call the load nominees method from that class. And it's going to bring up a message box to see if it's actually reading in everything. So message box.show. We're going to take noms.count and convert that to a string. And we'll simply add on a literal string of records. And of course, toString is a method. All right. I misspelled list here, so I can get the squiggly. Okay, so we're going to start our project up. We're going to load the nominee list. It's going to go to our SQLite data access class that we created and run the load nominees method, which will put everything into, put all of our records into noms, and then we'll display how many records were loaded. So let's see if this is connecting and working. And so we're getting a message box of 11,058 records. Now, this is in our form load, so it's showing the message box before it's actually showing us the form of having been constructed. So as soon as I say OK, we'll see the form show up. All right, so we're getting the connection to our database and reading in the records. The next step is to get all the years. And so in our load nominee list, I'm now going to comment out that message box. We no longer need that. We know it's working. And I'm just going to create another method called getYears. And we will code that method. Private, not going to return anything. getYears, and no parameters being passed. We're going to take our LST years and clear out the items. And then I'll simply run a foreach loop for each nominee XYZ in noms. We're going to go through our noms. And I'm going to say if the list doesn't include the year of XYZ, I want to add it. So we can use a not lstyears.items.contains. We'll see if it contains XYZ dot year, and I want to convert that to a string. If it doesn't include it, remember we have this little not operator up here, the exclamation mark. So if it does not contain the year, we want to add it. So lst years dot items dot add, and we're going to add xyz dot year dot toString. Let's just test this and see if it works. And there's our years. So now I want to be able to select a year and have it display the categories for that year, because the categories do change from year to year. So back in our design, I'm going to add another label and list. So I'm going to copy these and paste. We'll widen out our list box. I'm going to change the text of years label to categories. And let's name this list box LST category. I should make it categories, plural. LST categories. Okay. So now, when I click a year, I then want to get the categories. So we'd already created the stub for selected index change on LST year. So I'm just going to double click again, go back to that stub. We're going to take selected year. That was our class level variable. And say it equals LST years dot selected item dot toString. But remember, selected year is an integer, so we want to do int dot parse of our string. So that's going to store that then in our class level variable, and we use that elsewhere. I want to go ahead and clear out the category. So LST categories dot items dot clear. I'm going to have another list for our nominees that I want to clear as well. I'm going to go ahead and type that in here, even though we haven't created that yet. So it'll be LST nominees dot items dot clear. So I'm getting a little red squiggly on the LST nominees. We haven't created that, so I'm going to go back to my design form, and once again I'm going to just select the label and the list, copy and paste. And I'm going to take the list box and stretch it out considerably. For the label, I'm going to set the text to the nominees were. We'll do some ellipses. So now once we get the categories, when I click a category, I want it to show the nominees for that category. But as we're changing the years and changing the categories, we make sure that we're clearing out the nominees. So that's why back in this code here we had LST nominees.items.clear, and I realized I forgot to name that list box. So let's name that LST nominees. Okay. And back in our code, the squiggly's now gone away. LST nominees now exist. I also want to have a label that's going to show the winner. So I'm going to button to show that winner. So I'm going to create a button here. And the text of the button will be, and the winner was. Give us some ellipses. I'm going to make this font a little bit bigger. Bold 12. And then I'm going to roll this up a little bit, put the button up, and now I'm going to take the label and create a label here. We're going to set the auto size to false. We're going to name this LBL winner. And I'm going to set the font to bold 16 point. I'm going to set the text to red, text color to red, and I'm going to get rid of the text there. And I'm going to come back and change the name of my button to be BTN winner. All right, I'm going to go back to my code now. And the reason I added that in was I also want to clear out anything that's in that label. So LBL winner dot text equals quote quote, or you could say LBL winner dot clear. Either way would work. And then we're going to use a LINQ statement to pull out the categories. So I'm going to create a variable called cats. And we're going to read from XYZ in noms, where XYZ dot year equals selected year. So we're going to look at the items in the noms list that have the selected year. And we're going to order these by the category, xyz.category. And then we'll simply say select XYZ. Put my semicolon to close that LINQ statement. So it's going to create an extraction into a new list called cats. Now we're going to go through that list and just pull out the individual items just like we did in our years. In fact, I'm going to kind of make this simple. I'm going to go up to my previous statement where we had the foreach, nominee, XYZ, and noms. I'm going to copy that and paste this. I'm going to change XYZ to cat and noms to cats. And so if lst categories .items .contains cat.category, and I don't need to convert that to a string because it is a string. And so if that doesn't exist, then we're going to add it to our categories list. And because the button that we created for the winner was will simply show the value of our winner variable, I'm just simply going to set winner equal to quote quote, just to clear anything that might already exist there. So let's try this if we get the categories. So if I click on a year, I get the categories for that year. And you'll notice that the categories change based on the different years. Okay, so the next thing to do is I want to be able to select a category and see the nominees. So we now need to create a stub for the selected index changed of the categories. So we'll go back to our design. I'm just going to double click on LST categories, and we'll create a variable called selected cat. It's going to be a type string, and selected cat is going to equal our selected item of this LST category. Categories, selected item, and we're going to convert that to a string. Once again, we're going to clear out anything that's in that LST nominees list box. Clear out anything from LBL winner. And once again, we'll use a LINQ statement. I'm just going to call the variable nominees. So we'll do it from XYZ and noms, where XYZ dot year equals our class level variable of selected year, and this should be XYZ, and XYZ dot category equals selected cat. So we're going to make sure we get the nominees that match up the category and the year. We're going to order these by xyz.entity. That's going to be the nominee's name. And then we'll select XYZ. So that's our LINQ statement. That's going to create a sublist named nominees that match the year in the category and show us the entities. And then I'm going to select my previous for each loop, because we're going to do the same thing here. We'll paste in, and I'll call this ABC, nominee ABC in nominees. And if LST nominees dot items dot contains, this is a not, does not contain that. And what we're looking for here is abc dot entity. This is probably a moot point because we're probably going to have each entity is probably only going to be in the list once, but just in case if somebody's been nominated for two things, then it would only show their name once. So I'm going to add this to nominees. abc.entity. Now I'm going to do one thing extra here, and that is there's also that winner field in our database that says whether they won the award or not. So while we're looking at each entity, I want to see if they won. And if they won, we're going to put that into our winner class level variable. So if ABC, and I'm going to convert that to a lowercase and say if that equals true, then winner is going to equal abc.entity. And I got a little typo here. Change that to nominees. Make sure there's no red squigglies. That all looks good. I'm going to go back to my design I'm going to double click on the button. So now we should have the nominees being listed. And then I'm going to click this, and the winner was, and see who won. So I'm going to double click there. And this is simply going to be LBL winner dot text equals winner. All right, let's try this. I'm going to select 2014, select Best Picture. Here are all the pictures that were nominated for Best Picture, and then I can see which one won by clicking the button, and Birdman was the winner. Let's try another one. Let's go 2017. Let's try Actor in a Leading Role, and Gary Oldman was the winner. Best Picture that year, The Shape of Water. So I'm going to go back to the design. I'm going to add a button up in the upper right hand corner. And the text for this button is going to be Show Search. And we'll simply name this BTN Show Search. And then we're going to create a panel. So I don't absorb any of the existing items. I'm going to create a panel that doesn't encase any of our objects. I'm going to set the background color of this panel. And since we're talking Oscars, let's make the background color gold. I'm going to create a label. The text of that label will be search for. I'm going to add a text box to the right of that, which will be our entry for the search string. And we'll call it txt search. And then a button to the right of that. We'll call this BTN search. And our text will simply be search on that button. And then we'll take a checked list box. And we'll simply name this CHKLST nominations. And now I can make my panel larger. And I also want to name this panel. Let's call it PNL search. And I'm going to code my show search button to hide and show this panel. So I'm going to double click on the show search button. And we can simply say PNL search dot visible equals not PNL search dot visible. And that will simply reverse the visible attribute from true to false or false to true. And that hides and shows. But I also want to change that button text to represent the different states. So here we will use an if statement. If btn show search dot text equals show search, and I do want a space in there. And so if that's the case, then we're going to set the text equal to hide search. So btn show search dot text equals hide search. and then I want an else fork. I'm going to copy this statement, and paste it, and change the hide to show. Okay, so I'm going to test that. Now I want to create with my panel being not visible. So I'm going to go back to the design, just simply choose the panel, and set the visible property to false. So it initially is hidden. So I'm going to start again. Click Show Search. Now I get a hide search, and it hides it. Okay, so we want to basically create our search button here to take the text that they enter and show any nominations. And since this video is running long, I'm just going to paste in some code here and just walk you through it. So I created a string called seeking. It's going to equal the whatever the user's entered in that txt search text box. I set it to lower, and then I use LINQ to search all the nominations for where the entity .toLower contains seeking, and I order those by year. I'm going to clear the list box, or the checked list box. I'm going to set a counter named IDX, basically stands for index, to 0, and then if the count is greater than 0, meaning it found something, we're going to go through our subset of found and add the year and a space and a category and a dash and the name to the checklist box. And if they won, so abc.winner.toLower equals true, if they won, then we're going to set item checked of IDX to true. And of course, each time through that loop, we need to increment IDX. If there were no matches, then it should return no matches found. So let's test this out. I'm going to show the search. I'm going to search for James Cagney, and he was nominated 3 times for Best Actor, 1 in 1942. If I just type in Fonda, I'm going to find records for Henry Fonda, Jane Fonda, and Peter Fonda, and between the 3 of them, there were 4 winners. So that all works. That's our project.